The bank manager slid the paper across the desk without a word. My savings account read $3.14. $200,000, 15 years of my life, was gone. My husband had drained every penny using my own signature. A signature he had forged. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat in that quiet office with a polite man who looked at me with pity and felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. I already knew this was coming. Daniel had told me months ago, watch, wait, let every dollar disappear before walking in. He needed it official. On record. In front of a witness. So I had done exactly that. Watched every transfer clear, kept my mouth shut, and walked in that morning carrying more than grief. I was carrying a case. Mrs. Ward, the manager said carefully, "Are you aware your account balance is $3.14? I let shock show on my face. Because some of it was real. There is a difference between knowing something intellectually and having a stranger read the number aloud in a quiet room. That's impossible, I said. There should be over $200,000 in there. I have not authorized a single withdrawal in months. He turned his screen toward me. Transfer after transfer, each bearing my name in a handwriting I recognized instantly. The sharp, aggressive slant of my husband's pen. I had never signed one of them, but I was not broken. I was ready. Before I even reached my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Caleb. Don't overreact. It was our money anyway. I stopped walking. I read it twice. No apology, no guilt, not even the decency to pretend. Just that one line. Our money. As though stealing $200,000 from the woman he shared a bed with was a minor administrative decision he hadn't gotten around to mentioning. The arrogance of it hit me harder than the theft itself. He genuinely was not afraid. I wasn't surprised he knew I was there. During the final weeks of my surveillance, I'd found that he had set up alerts on the account. His phone would ping the second anyone touched it. The moment the bank manager opened my file, Caleb knew. He'd built himself an early warning system. He thought it made him untouchable. What it actually did was tell me exactly how prepared he was to be caught and how certain he was that he wouldn't be. The bank manager confirmed that the forged signatures so closely matched mine that every transaction had sailed through without question. When I asked who had stood at the counter and signed my name, he answered quietly, "Your husband." I sat in my car for a long time after that, watching strangers go about their afternoon while my entire world burned. When I started the engine, I didn't head home to fall apart. I headed home to finish this. He was on the couch, beer in hand, game on the television, like it was any other Tuesday. I stood in the doorway for 1 second and made a decision. Before stepping inside, I reached into my bag and pressed the small button on my voice recorder, slipping it back into my jacket pocket. If he was going to talk, and I knew he would, because men like Caleb always want to explain, I was going to capture every word. Permanently. He looked up with that smirk. The one that had replaced every expression I used to love on his face. He didn't wait for me to speak. He launched straight into his pitch, an investment opportunity, a business, a future that would make us both wealthy. He actually used the word us. He reframed stealing my life savings as something he'd done for our benefit. "Why did you forge my name?" I asked. My voice was steady in a way I hadn't expected. He shrugged without looking away from the screen. "You would have said no, and I didn't have time for a debate." Then came the line that sealed everything. "Relax, what's yours is mine anyway." I nodded slowly. I let him believe the nod meant I was yielding. He took it as surrender. He told me he was heading out to celebrate, and the moment his car disappeared from the driveway, I let out one long breath. Then I moved. The house felt like a crime scene the moment he left, which is exactly what it was. I went straight to my office and opened the locked drawer he believed held only old paperwork. Inside, thick folders, stacked documents, months of carefully gathered receipts. I pulled the voice recorder from my jacket and set it beside everything else. His confession, clean, recorded and permanent, had just joined the file. I felt a grim, quiet satisfaction placing it there. My suspicion hadn't started with the bank account. It had started months earlier, with the kind of small changes you notice when you've lived beside someone for 15 years. A credit card appearing in his wallet I'd never seen before. Phone calls that ended the instant I walked into the room. Money quietly bleeding out of our joint expenses while his excuses grew more elaborate. Bank error, business stress, timing issue. I am not a naive woman. I didn't wait for proof to fall into my lap. I started building it myself. I photographed documents. I kept a handwritten log of every lie, every inconsistency, every date and amount. I told myself it was just a precaution, just in case I was overreacting. But the truth I kept pushing down was simpler. The man I had married was not the man currently sleeping in my house. Someone had replaced him, someone who looked at me with calculation instead of love, and I had the receipts to prove it. The moment everything shifted came 3 months ago. He never let me clean his car, never. So when he asked me to grab something from the glove box, I opened it and found a second phone. He was in the house. I had maybe 10 minutes. I turned it on. It wasn't locked. I sat in the garage and spent 2 hours photographing every message, every contact, every call log on that device, then replaced it exactly as I'd found it and walked back inside with a completely neutral face. He never knew. What I found on that phone was not a secret credit card or a few embarrassing messages. This was a plan. He was exchanging detailed messages with someone about liquidating assets and accessing the capital. He spoke about me like an obstacle on a road he had already decided to take. In one message, he called our marriage a temporary inconvenience. I photographed that one twice. That evening, sitting alone in my office with those images on my screen, the last of my disbelief finally burned away. The bank account wasn't impulsive. It was the final phase of something he had been engineering for over a year. I wasn't a wife he'd betrayed in a moment of weakness. I was a target he had been managing from the start. The rage I felt was cold and focused, and for the first time, I knew exactly what to do with it. One name appeared in those messages more than any other. Victor Hale. I spent the next several weeks building a complete picture of him. What I found made my skin crawl. Victor had a long trail of fraudulent investment schemes, multiple civil lawsuits, and a gift for finding the right kind of partner. Men who were ambitious and greedy, but not particularly careful. Men who would absorb all the legal exposure in exchange for the promise of a big payday. Caleb fit that profile perfectly. He thought he was an equal player. He was actually the most replaceable piece in the machine. The messages between them were revolting. In one exchange, Caleb bragged about accessing the capital soon and described me as someone who won't notice until it's too late. Reading that for the first time, I had pressed my hand flat on the desk to stop it from shaking. Then I photographed it, labeled it, and added it to the folder. I understood clearly that confronting Caleb too early would destroy everything. The moment he felt cornered, the money would disappear into untraceable accounts, and both men would walk free. I didn't just need to stop him. I needed to let him go far enough that the entire structure came down with him. I needed to see the whole machine running before I dismantled it. So I kept smiling, I kept the folders locked, and I waited. Several weeks before the money disappeared, I took everything to a professional, not a divorce attorney, a fraud attorney, named Daniel Avery. I brought the phone photographs, the missing household fund records, the suspicious messages about my savings, and months of detailed written observations. Daniel reviewed everything quietly. When he looked up, he didn't need long to understand what he was looking at. He was direct. If I confronted Caleb now, he would move everything into untraceable accounts and reframe the whole thing as a marital disagreement. No criminal case, no recovery, no consequences. Wait for him to commit the crime, Daniel said. If he forges your name and moves that money, we have forgery, financial fraud, and identity theft. All three. But only if you let it happen. He gave me a clear set of instructions. Install a camera in the home office, record every relevant conversation, save every message, document everything in real time. I want you to understand what that required. Every dinner, every ordinary evening, every moment I sat across from a man who was quietly stealing my future, and I had to smile. I had to pretend I believed him. I had to perform contentment so convincingly that he never once thought to be more careful. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I left Daniel's office with one instruction: wait for the trap to close. The day I walked into that bank, it finally had. The morning after my first meeting with Daniel, I installed a small high-definition camera near the desk in our home office, angled to capture the surface, his hands, and every document placed in front of him. Invisible from where he sat. That was the last move I made that he saw coming. From that point, I watched him daily. I reviewed footage on my phone at lunch, in my car, on a park bench after work, wherever I could sit alone without him noticing my face. I watched him search through my personal files with the calm efficiency of someone who had done it before. I watched him photograph pages from my passport. I watched him write my social security number on a piece of paper, fold it carefully, and slide it into his jacket pocket. I watched him take calls from Victor. I watched him flip open a small ledger in the locked bottom drawer and make notes with a pen he kept specifically for that purpose. He did all of this with the quiet ease of a man who was completely certain no one was watching him. Everything went into a shared digital folder I updated for Daniel regularly. Every suspicious text was screenshotted. Every bank statement I could access was printed and annotated with dates and amounts. I was building a cage around him, one document at a time, in the exact space where he moved freely, certain he was untouchable. He had no idea the walls were already up. The most devastating footage came from a Tuesday evening, several weeks before the money vanished. I watched Caleb sit down at the office desk with a stack of blank withdrawal slips and my passport open beside them. For nearly an hour, he practiced my signature. Over and over. He traced it first, then tried it freehand, then compared the two under a magnifying glass. Patient, methodical, completely calm. I watched that footage in the dark bedroom with the phone screen as the only light. My hands shook, not with fear, but with a fury so cold it felt physical. I had known for months what he was planning. I had seen the messages. I had watched him searching my files. But seeing him sit there quietly perfecting the ability to be me, to sign my name, to stand at a bank counter as me, to steal from me using my own identity, stripped away the last trace of ambiguity. This was not weakness or desperation. This was deliberate. Practiced, premeditated. I sent the footage to Daniel immediately with 4 words, proof of intent, on camera. He called within the hour. The footage established criminal planning weeks before the transactions. That was the proof of premeditation that made the case unbreakable. Once he commits the fraud, Daniel said, nothing will save him. We were close. All I had to do was hold the performance together for a little longer. I could do that. When I called Daniel to confirm the $200,000 had finally moved, he didn't celebrate. He just said, good. Now let him spend it. Every dollar he touches from here adds another count to the charges. Cold. Strategic. Exactly what I needed to hear. So I went home and gave the performance of my life. A woman who had quietly collapsed. I let the silences hang. I moved through the house like someone who had completely given up, resigned to the idea that the money was gone and there was no point fighting. Caleb watched me carefully for several days. I could feel him measuring me, waiting to see if I was going to become a problem. When I didn't, his posture relaxed, his spending accelerated. He had decided I was no longer a threat. A few days later, the bank called, routine procedure after any large account movement. I used that call exactly the way Daniel had coached me. I said it slowly, clearly, on a line I knew was being recorded. I did not authorize any of these transactions. Not a single one. That was it. My in-person denial was already sitting on record at the branch. Now I had a second statement, on a separate channel, in my own voice. 2 walls instead of 1. Daniel had always told me, make them build 2 separate cases to break you down. So I did. With my money in his accounts and flowing toward Victor's company, Caleb became a different person. The controlled, careful man who had spent months laying his trap disappeared overnight, replaced by someone reckless and loud and utterly drunk on himself. Shopping bags from high-end stores appeared by the front door. A new suit almost every week. He rented office space in the financial district and spent his days on loud calls about venture capital and generational wealth and the empire he was building. He said my name less and less. He started treating me the way you treat furniture, things you move around occasionally, but don't really see anymore. The comments were the worst part. Vague, half-finished things about how I would soon be comfortable without needing to work. Said without warmth. said the way you tie up loose ends. He looked at me with faint pity, the way a person regards something that once served a purpose. I was the bank. The bank was empty. As far as he was concerned, the transaction was complete. I watched him one evening in the hallway mirror, adjusting a silk tie he had bought with money he had stolen from me, completely absorbed in his own reflection. I felt something settle inside my chest, not rage, not grief, just a cold, precise satisfaction. He had no idea how close the walls were. He had no idea that the life he was preening for was already over. He had simply not been told yet. The final piece arrived on an ordinary Wednesday. Caleb took a call in the living room, apparently assuming I was asleep. I wasn't. I was standing just inside the bedroom doorway with the recorder running and the door open 1 careful inch. He was talking to Victor, bright, loose, comfortable, the voice of a man who believes everything is settled. The launch party is going to be huge, he said. His voice then dropped a register, taking on that private conspiratorial tone. Once the company launches and the first funding round clears, I'm filing for divorce. I won't need the headache anymore. I want to be honest about what that did to me. I had known for months who he was. I had the proof. I had the recordings, the footage, the messages. I had long since stopped mourning the marriage. But hearing him describe the end of 15 years, my 15 years, as a line item on a business plan, something to cross off once the money was safely moved, broke something open in a way I had not expected. It was a specific kind of pain. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I stood in the dark and let the recorder capture every word. When the call ended, I sat on the edge of the bed and labeled the file with a steady hand. The last trace of pity I had carried for him, and there had been so little left, dissolved in that moment completely. It did not come back. A week later, he told me about the launch party. He had booked a hotel ballroom, arranged catering, invited local business leaders and major investors. Victor Hale would be the guest of honor. The event would announce Caleb, his word, as a serious force in the investment world. He said it with the barely contained excitement of someone who has never once considered that consequences are real. He informed me I was required to attend, dressed well, smiling, playing the devoted wife of a visionary businessman. I looked at him and produced the most composed smile I had ever built from scratch. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I told him. He heard enthusiasm. He had no idea what I meant. The moment he left, I called Daniel. We had already talked about this. A public arrest, at the peak of everything, in front of everyone he'd invited to celebrate him. Daniel hadn't hesitated. Do it at the party, he'd said. Let him fall in front of his whole audience. We confirmed the date with the detectives and locked down every detail. Daniel confirmed he would be there, moving quietly among the guests, ready to give the signal the moment I called. Caleb wanted a room full of witnesses to his success. That was exactly what I was going to give him. The same people he had gathered to applaud him would instead watch everything collapse. I had spent months being invisible. At this party, everyone in that room was going to finally see me. In the days before the party, Daniel assembled the complete evidence into a single devastating package. Camera footage of Caleb practicing my signature at his desk, weeks before the withdrawals, proving he had planned this in cold blood. The full bank record chain tracing every stolen transfer. The recorded confrontation where Caleb admitted to my face that he had forged my name and taken the money. The phone recording of him casually planning our divorce as a business transaction. And statements from the bank tellers who had looked him in the eye at the counter. People who could stand in a courtroom and say, that is the man who signed her name. 3 charges. Forgery, financial fraud, identity theft. When Daniel closed the folder and looked at me across the desk, he said 4 words I had been waiting months to hear. He is going to prison. Then he said 4 more. So is Victor Hale. I had been holding myself together for so long that hearing it out loud nearly broke me, but in the best possible way. Caleb spent those days completely absorbed in the party's catering menu and seating chart, lost in the details of an event he genuinely believed would change his life. He was right about that part. I spent those same days confirming my finances were fully secured and that I had somewhere safe to go when the night was over. Everything was in place. All that remained was the finale. The night of the party, the ballroom smelled of expensive perfume and old money. Caleb was in his element, working the room with handshakes and loud laughter, making sure every person there noticed him. He had spent $200,000 of my money to buy himself a room full of people who believed in him, and he looked like the happiest man alive. He checked on me periodically, scanning to make sure I was positioned correctly and smiling on cue. I was. Near the back of the room, I caught a brief glimpse of Daniel, suited, composed, entirely unremarkable among the investors. Our eyes met for 1 second. A small, almost invisible nod. I looked away and took a slow sip of water. When the music faded, Caleb took the stage. He paused at the microphone, a man savoring what he believed was the peak of his entire life. He thanked Victor Hale for his visionary partnership. He acknowledged the investors. And then he said the line that quieted several nearby tables. I built this company from nothing. It took grit, determination, and the courage to take risks when others wouldn't. The room applauded warmly. I stood near the back with my arms folded and watched the man I had once loved lie fluently and completely to 100 people who had no reason not to believe him. I felt nothing except the quiet, steady knowledge of what was coming. He had maybe 40 minutes left at the top of the world. During a break between speeches, Caleb spotted me near a cluster of investors and crossed the room. He put his arm around my shoulder, the kind of squeeze that isn't affection, it's performance, and turned to the group. My wife worries too much about money, he said, voice pitched to Carrie. She's old-fashioned. She likes her savings where she can see them. I always tell her, you have to let money breathe if you want it to grow. The group laughed, the polished, appreciative laugh of wealthy people at a party. I felt the heat rise at the back of my neck. The particular humiliation of being used as a prop, mocked with your own stolen money in a room full of strangers, by a man who thought you were too broken to fight back. I did not pull away from his arm. I looked him directly in the eye. I've learned a great deal lately about how money grows, I said, quietly and precisely. The double meaning sailed completely over his head. He laughed again, gave my shoulder a patronizing pat, and moved on to the next group. I watched him go. He had just publicly mocked me using my own stolen money as the punchline in front of witnesses, without a single flicker of guilt. I thought about the evidence folder. I thought about the 2 dark vehicles across the street. I allowed myself one private thought. It would not be long now. The climax came when Victor Hale called for the room's attention. A signing table had been set up at the center of the ballroom, caught in a directed spotlight that gave the moment the weight of a ceremony. Victor produced the official investment partnership documents, the papers that would formalize the company and authorize the movement of the next funding round. He handed Caleb a gold pen like he was presenting a trophy. Caleb took it. He looked out at the assembled room, let the silence stretch for effect, then bent over the table and signed his name with a slow, deliberate flourish. He straightened and held the pen slightly aloft. The room responded with applause. I had moved closer during the signing. I watched his hand move across the page. I recognized that handwriting immediately. The same sharp, forward-leaning slant from the forged withdrawal slips, from the footage of him practicing at his desk, from every piece of evidence I had spent months collecting. The handwriting of a man who had spent weeks perfecting my signature and was now proudly, publicly writing his own. He looked up from the table and found my face. He winked, genuinely believing he was sharing a moment of triumph with me. I looked back at him without expression. In front of 100 witnesses, under a spotlight, he had just signed his own name to his own confession. I turned and walked toward the side exit. It was time. The balcony was cool and quiet. I stood for one moment, steadied myself, then called Daniel. He picked up immediately. I could hear the low murmur of the ballroom behind him. He had already moved toward the lobby, exactly as planned. "It's time," I said. My voice was the steadiest I had ever heard it. "He just signed the documents. Everyone is here." A brief pause. Then Daniel said simply, "Giving the signal now." I looked down at the street. Across the road, in the shadow of a parking structure, 2 unmarked vehicles sat dark and still. As I watched, interior lights came on. Doors opened. Officers moved with quiet, unhurried efficiency. The vehicles pulled forward and turned toward the hotel entrance. I want to describe what that felt like. Watching those headlights move. For months I had lived inside a performance. Every dinner, every smile, every careful silence, all of it had been weight I was carrying and could not put down. And standing on that balcony, watching those lights, I felt it begin to lift. Not triumph. Not rage. Something quieter and more complete than both. Like finally being allowed to breathe. I straightened my shoulders, turned back toward the side door, and walked back into the warmth and noise of the ballroom. I took my position near the entrance and stood very still. The finale I had spent months preparing was about to begin. Inside, the celebration was at its absolute peak. Caleb stood at the front of the room with his champagne glass raised high, mid-toast, talking confidently and loudly about the limitless future the company represented. When the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a floor-shaking impact that cut through every sound in the room like a blade, the music stopped cold. The room went completely silent with the specific, suffocating quality of silence that only falls when something has gone visibly, publicly, catastrophically wrong in front of a crowd. 4 uniformed officers and 2 plainclothes detectives walked in. Calm, unhurried. Their footsteps measured and deliberate on the marble floor. Every single head in the room turned at once. Some guests reached instinctively for their phones. Others simply froze where they stood. Caleb did not move. His champagne glass was still raised in a toast that was never going to happen. His expression cycled rapidly, irritation first, then confusion, then the first spreading shadow of something he had never once allowed himself to prepare for. Genuine, undeniable dread. He looked at the officers, then at me, then back at the officers. The confidence he had performed all evening drained from his face, not slowly, all at once. He stood motionless under the spotlight that had been designed to celebrate him. That same light was now showing everyone in that room exactly who he truly was. The lead officer walked through the parting crowd as if the grandeur of the room simply didn't register. He stopped at the base of the stage steps and looked directly up at Caleb. "Are you Caleb Ward?" Calm, clear, the kind of voice that doesn't need to be loud to fill a room. Caleb tried to laugh. It came out completely wrong. Too short, too high, bouncing awkwardly off the same speakers he'd used minutes earlier to declare his greatness to a room full of admirers. "Yes. Is there a problem with the valet?" The tremor buried in his voice gave away everything his smile was trying to hide. The officer didn't smile. He raised the thick manila folder, the one Daniel and I had built month by careful month, document by document, until there was no gap and no alternative reading of any of it. "Caleb Ward, you are under formal investigation for multiple counts of financial fraud, forgery, and identity theft." The room gasped, one collective sound, part disbelief, part the particular horror of people who suddenly understand they were almost victims too. The champagne glass in Caleb's hand shook so badly that liquid poured down the front of his expensive suit. His eyes swept the room. Exits, allies, any remaining option. The officers had already taken their positions. Every door was covered. There was nowhere left for the performance to go. It was over. The detectives didn't just arrest him. They read the evidence out loud, in front of everyone. $200,000, drained with a forged signature. Camera footage of him at his own desk, practicing that forgery weeks in advance. His own voice on a recording admitting he'd done it. My denial, stated twice, in 2 places, on 2 separate dates, that I never touched that money. They laid it piece by piece, like turning over cards on a table, each one worse than the last. Evidence built on evidence. A cage assembled around him while he was still inside it. Victor Hale had been standing at the signing table seconds ago, like a man presiding over a triumph. Now he went very still. When one of the detectives turned and looked directly at him, he took a slow step backward. As though distance from his own name might offer protection, it offered none. The investigators had already traced the exact path of the stolen funds, from my account, through Caleb's personal accounts, and directly into Victor's company. The investment firm was being exposed in real time as a structure built entirely on stolen money. Investors who had arrived ready to write large checks were already pulling out their phones, voices dropping to urgent whispers. The room they had entered to celebrate a launch was now witnessing that launch's complete and permanent destruction. The walls Caleb had never seen, the ones I had been quietly building for months, had just closed around him completely. In the middle of the chaos, Caleb found my eyes. He stared at me with an expression I had never seen on him. Not just shock, but the specific, disorienting horror of a man who has just realized he catastrophically misread someone he thought he knew completely. His mouth moved before any sound came out. How did this happen? I walked slowly toward the stage. The guests near us went quiet, sensing the weight of what was passing between us. I stopped a few feet from where he stood and looked at him, not with anger, not with triumph, but with the plain, unshakable calm of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a moment to arrive. "You practiced my name too many times, Caleb," I said. Quietly, clearly, that was all. I watched the full meaning move across his face. The months of my apparent resignation, the careful smiles, the silent acceptance every time he pushed. He had read every single one of those moments as weakness. He had watched me absorb blow after blow and interpreted each one as surrender. The possibility that I had been building something while he was destroying something, methodically, patiently, invisibly, had never once crossed his mind. He had not been living with a broken woman. He had been living with the person building his prosecution. The officers moved up the steps. I turned and walked away. The handcuffs closed with a sound I will carry for the rest of my life. A clean, metallic double click that cut through the ballroom like a gavel. The room erupted. Investors surged toward the signing table, demanding their documents back. Others were on phones, voices low and fast, detaching themselves from any association with the company before their names could appear anywhere official. Victor Hale made one final desperate attempt to save himself. He stepped forward, speaking loudly, positioning himself as a victim, claiming ignorance, insisting he had been deceived by Caleb just like everyone else. He had clearly rehearsed this. He delivered it with conviction. He almost sounded believable. The investigators were better prepared. A detective produced a separate set of documents, communications between Victor and Caleb spanning over a year, in which Victor hadn't merely known where the stolen money came from, but had actively advised Caleb on the optimal timing and method for the transfers. He hadn't been deceived. He had been the architect. The room went cold and still when that landed. Both men were escorted out through the main ballroom doors, in front of every investor, every business leader, every carefully selected witness Caleb had personally assembled to watch his greatest moment. The grand launch of the decade became the most public prosecution of the year. The doors swung shut behind them, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. When the officers were gone, and the room had settled into a low, stunned murmur, I walked to the front and picked up the microphone. I had no prepared speech. I had something better. The truth, which I had not been permitted to say aloud to anyone outside Daniel's office for months. I told them everything. Plainly, in sequence. The company they had come to invest in had been funded entirely with money stolen from my personal savings account through forgery. Every dollar of the foundation was mine. I described the surveillance, the evidence, the months of performance required to hold it all together. I told them the opportunity they had been offered tonight had never been real. It was a fraud designed to take their money the same way it had taken mine. The room was silent when I finished. Then a woman near the front began to applaud, slow at first, then fully committed. Several others followed. Guests came to find me afterward, shaking my hand, thanking me. One man who had been close to committing a very large sum said simply, "You saved me." Daniel appeared at my side, steady as always. Injunctions already filed, asset recovery already in motion. I handed back the microphone and looked at the empty stage where my husband had stood less than an hour ago, certain he had won. The theater was over. I did not have to perform anymore. I was finally just myself again. Months later, I walked out of the courthouse for the last time. The road had been long. Depositions, hearings, forensic accountants, cross-examinations, documentation I had once thought no single case could require. But I had followed every step of it, and the end delivered everything I had worked toward. My savings were returned in full, plus damages. Caleb was convicted on all 3 counts. The judge didn't go easy. He looked at the evidence, called it what it was, and sentenced accordingly. Victor Hale went down too. The year-long chain of messages between them was read aloud in that courtroom, and the jury didn't take long. When the verdict came in, I sat very still and let myself feel it. The divorce was granted on terms built entirely around what Caleb had done to me. He got nothing. I got everything back. I stood on the courthouse steps and let the afternoon sun settle over me. I thought about the woman who had sat in a bank manager's office and heard 15 years of her life read back to her as a number. I thought about the months of silence, patience, and performance that followed. I thought about what it had cost to wait. Then I thought about tomorrow morning. No surveillance to run. No evidence to file. No role left to maintain. Just my life, returned to me, entirely mine. I looked down at my hands. They were completely still. For the first time in 15 years, I felt free. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to hear more stories like this one. The next story is already waiting, and I promise you, you won't see the ending coming.